Can you hear me? So the resolution today is that meditation should be taught in schools. I want to first define, as I understand it, the resolution, and then I will make my case. So meditation should be taught in schools. I want to define this in some ways by saying what it doesn't mean, and that means that it should not be necessarily compulsory for all students in all schools, but rather should be offered as a course in schools. Now, it's dubious as to whether there is a legal problem at all, but this would certainly take out any type of Establishment Clause argument as previous debaters have made, as this would not be compulsory, but rather would be an offering. In many schools, public schools included, there are different religious classes taught, not to inculcate someone into the religion, but rather to give someone information about the religion. Now, the reason that meditation should be taught in schools is due to the myriad of benefits that meditation gives, including to boost your immune system, mental focus. There are studies by not only Harvard but UCLA which indicate that under neural scans, the actual plasticity of the brain improves and gets stronger with the use of a meditation practice. So, as I understand the resolution that meditation should be taught in schools, I would suggest that as an elective class, that meditation should be taught 2 to 3 times per week in a one-period block, whether it be 30 minutes or 50 minutes, whatever the school has, and that would allow the students to be able to obtain the benefits of the meditation without having some problem caused by the compulsory nature of it. So with that, I will pass it to my colleague here.
So first, I just need to clarify something. So when you say that it's not going to be compulsory, it's going to be some sort of after-school club kind of thing, and how will kids know to join it?
I don't mean that it's necessarily an after-school club, but maybe an elective, like Spanish class or French class or some other type of voluntary class that is not compulsory on everyone.
So I think that when we're discussing this in this motion, and if meditation should be taught in schools, it's necessary to actually look at the context and the context of what the motion that is dealing with today, and that meditation is being taught as a mandatory subject. So I propose that the affirmative must argue that meditation should be taught in schools, not just as an after-school club, or not just as an elective class like you can learn about a religion, but actually as something that will pertain to more students as a whole. So I'm going to detail the reasons to oppose, which are twofold. So my first objection is that teaching meditation in school unjustly violates the liberty by establishing religion. So first, let's look at the Establishment Clause, which the U.S. Constitution gives religious liberty in the form of the Establishment Clause, that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion above another. Courts have ruled that while students can pray or meditate on campus, schools cannot teach these actions. And the second point is that mindfulness meditation is inherently religious. So just because leaders have replaced religious terms with secular terms doesn't mean mindfulness isn't religious, nor that there is no religious intent behind this push. Mr. Kabat-Zinn, the founder of this mindfulness or meditation movement, was first introduced to meditation by a Zen Buddhist missionary. And in 2015 TED Talk, a deputy high priest in Zen Buddhism said mindfulness has been a part of Buddhist traditions for many centuries. It's a practice and way of thinking that helps us be present with an experience. The main practice of mindfulness is meditation. And Trudy Goodman stated what she advertises as secular mindfulness or meditation in public schools is stealth Buddhism. Although the secular classes use a different vocabulary, getting children to engage in the same practice of mindfulness or meditation that is taught in Buddhist classes transforms students whether they want it or not, and many go on to enroll in explicitly Buddhist classes. The point C is negative implications. So first, parents or kids whose religion or belief are against mindfulness meditation are forced to participate or have their kids engage in the practice. And second, it's unconstitutional, meaning that when their case is brought to a Supreme Court, it will be struck down, meaning he gets none of the benefits he touts. He says that it doesn't have to be mandatory. However, when you look at if it's not going to be mandatory or not, there's no way for him to actually guarantee anyone will actually want to enroll in the class or garner any benefits. So it's an either or trade-off that he's going to have to make. My second objection is that proposing provides minimal benefit and leads to certain harm psychologically and in critical thinking. So he talked a lot about the benefits of meditation. However, as I'm going to present now and in future speeches, there's actually not a very minimal benefit. And when you look to a comparative analysis, it's very little. So a 2014 meta-study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association by 15 doctors and psychologists analyzed over 1,000 national and international studies concerning the benefits of mindfulness meditation. They found that many of the studies were carried out with flawed methodology. Using the Academic Methods Guide for conducting comparative effectiveness review, they use measures of risk of bias, directness, consistency, and precision to find the studies that were carried out according to proper academic standards. The studies that passed this unbiased and academic framework numbered 47 trials over 3,500 participants. So I'm going to detail the rest of the study and what it entailed as a in the next speech, but I'll pass on the mic.
So to clarify, can you please explain to me what in the language of the resolution mandates that this be a compulsory class for every single student rather than an elective?
Okay, so I think the part that, or when you're looking at the context of the resolution, we have to look at the controversy that's in the news right now, and a lot of the news is it being mandatory. So if you're going to talk about how it can be compulsory, or it's not compulsory, or it's some sort of club that's not necessarily being taught in schools, like so that someone actually has to learn or is forced to do it, or in other hands, you won't be able to prove that many people will actually join the class.
Okay, so what I'm saying is not necessarily an after-school club. It's not an after-school club at all, but rather an elective class. And certainly there are elective classes that not every student takes, but some students take. Now, if you're indicating that though this class will be offered, no one will take it, I invite you to offer some sort of evidence for that assertion, but I would just counter the assertion with saying it is a very popular thing in the news today, and therefore many students would want to take it. So if you have some contra study to that or some contra evidence, I'm certainly happy to entertain it. Now, with regard to the benefits of meditation, now I've heard of this meta study that you've cited to here, but I'm not entirely sure when this study was produced, and so what studies it takes into account. So it's a little bit difficult for me to retort to that. However, I will tell you that an 8-week study conducted by Harvard researchers at the Massachusetts General Hospital determined that meditation literally rebuilds the brain's gray matter in just 8 weeks. And that's under a neuroimaging machine. So this is not anecdotal. This is not something that is soft science. This is actually hard data turned in by the machinery that we use to study the actual physical matter of the brain. So now again, perhaps your study has already taken that study into account and stated that it too is somehow flawed, but I would like you to go ahead and unpack that study and explain why a neuroimaging research program would not be an effective measurement tool. So I'll pass it to you then.
What specifically was, so I can give a comparative?
I'll have that for you. I don't have it just at my fingertips, but I can grab that for you in just a moment here. Would you like to move on to something else?
Okay, so where I left off, I talked about how this unbiased and academic framework numbered 47 trials in this meta study. It was conducted in 2014, so if you have any comparative you can make with that. So the study found that mindfulness meditation programs did show small improvements in anxiety, depression, and pain with moderate evidence. However, the study also said in our comparative effectiveness analyses, we found evidence of no or insufficient evidence that any of the meditation programs were more effective than any other methods, such as exercise, muscle relaxation, or other comparators in changing outcomes of interest. Now let's move on to subpoint B of this point, which is the harms of meditation. So there's psychological and mental harms. According to a 1992 study by UC Irvine professor Farias on mindfulness meditation, 63% of the group studied who each tried mindfulness had suffered at least one negative effect from meditation retreats, while 7% reported profoundly adverse effects, including panic, depression, pain, and anxiety. He said that it's difficult to tell how common negative experiences are because mindfulness researchers have failed to measure them and may even have discouraged participants from reporting them by attributing the blame to them. In addition, 4 psychologists, professors, and psychotherapists from Seattle Pacific University and University of Washington conducted a meta-study reviewing adverse side effects, which included depersonalization, psychosis, delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, and feelings of anxiety that resulted from mindfulness education. And although you're saying it could be voluntary, these things would still happen on kids that don't think that it's going to happen. And additionally, there's harm to action against injustice. American teacher Natalie Flores writes in 2015 that teaching mindfulness or meditation may perpetuate and promote institutional blindness, which helps to maintain the status quo rather than lead transformative change of power structures. Such learning environments may encourage children to become peaceful and passful in their acceptance of hardships due to what is being taught in these meditation sessions. So when teaching mindfulness becomes a vehicle towards academic improvement and encouraging normalized behavior, we run the risk of neglecting an awareness of the oppression that many people in our world currently endure. So I'm going to move on to some of his points, where he talks about how this kind of meditation doesn't need to be a compulsory class. So you have two options here. Either it is a compulsory class and you have the detriments as well as not really benefits and how it violates the establishment clause, or you don't have this mandatory class where he has to actually prove that people will want to join for him to actually accrue the benefits that he's talking about. However, I'd like to point out that even with the establishment clause in a public school, you cannot have, say, a Bible class that actively leads people in the class to pray during school hours. It has to be an after-school type of club. In the same way, you're not just teaching someone about meditation when you're trying to affirm the resolution. If you even have these non-compulsory classes or elective classes, you're actually having them engage in a religious practice, which is something that is inherently religious. As I've noted, the founders of the movement have ingrained Buddhist ideology into it and how it violates the establishment clause. In my next speech, I'm going to respond to his Harvard study, as well as look at the comparative analysis as to whether.
To answer your previous question, the Harvard study was posted on November 19th, 2014. So it seems unlikely that at the end of 2014 that your meta study, which was also published in 2014, could have possibly considered this study at all. Furthermore, I can't imagine, although I'm certainly open to your explanation, but I can't imagine the study would take issue with a neuroimaging. I mean, that's, again, the idea that that could somehow be some sort of, faulty methodology. It just, if you can explain it, fine, but I certainly can't understand it just from you citing to a study that says, well, all of these studies must be wrong because they use poor methodology. Now, with regard to your establishment clause, you say that, well, first of all, that prayer, there cannot be something in school where teachers lead someone in prayer. Now, while that may be true, you're conflating meditation and prayer. Second of all, you say in another, I guess, legal contention that meditation could not be taught during school, but rather had to be taught after school. I would ask you to cite to a case, because there is no such case in the United States precedent. Maybe there's another country, but of course that wouldn't matter here. So taking the legal issue out of it, as I believe we have, the detriments that you cite to with 7% of the students, again, I wonder if your meta study would also call into question the results of those studies. If all of these mindfulness meditation studies have these flaws in them, then I find it hard to believe that the studies which correlate or attribute causation of these negative side effects to meditation itself could have been the only ones that were done correctly. So I would wonder if you could maybe unpack the methodology of that. I know it's a little brief term we have here, but to be able to say that the negative aspects or the negative feelings felt that they are attributing to the meditation is actually from the meditation, or if it could be some other thing. Moreover, even if you had this small 7% which experience these negative side effects, you could probably find the same negative feelings or what have you when children have to take gym class and they are subject to playing basketball and they're terrible at basketball and they get beaten and they feel terrible about it. Do we stop teaching athletics because some children feel bad in having to participate? No, because we realize the benefit on the whole is much greater than the negative detriment to the minority.
Okay, so I'm going to first look at his Harvard study where he said, yes, I will admit that perhaps that wasn't taken into account in the meta-study analysis. However, you have to realize that there are other things which actually help to promote this rebuilding of this gray matter, such as different educational practices, critical thinking analysis. In addition, I'm exactly sure, but I assume certain forms of exercise would help to do this. Again, I can look into more of this later. How he also says that you can have teaching a class is teaching or leading meditation in schools is not prohibited under the Constitution if you do it unless it's after school. But what I'm saying is citing the Supreme Court case, which talks about how there can be no school-sanctioned prayer. And if you have a teacher leading prayer in a class that is like during school, that is a violation of the Constitution. And I'm comparing meditation to prayer by using the analysis that I brought in my first speech and how it is grounded in Buddhist beliefs. And you have similar things to mindfulness meditation as heartfulness meditation, where it's basically a secularized version of prayer where you're basically praying for someone, except you're just never mentioning God. It's a religious practice in and of itself. I'm comparing the same thing when the leaders of this movement are calling it stealth Buddhism, or ways that students will be more akin to want to participate in these Buddhist studies, etc. So what I'm saying is that it does violate the Establishment Clause, but because you're leading or having the school-sanctioned kind of activity during school time being taught in a classroom. Moving on to the, he says, how can we say the side effects are bad? And yes, I will admit that the evidence on here, again, is there needs to be more evidence before we actually move to some sort of conclusion, such as instituting meditation in schools. So first, I'd like to point out that people who had bad side effects were discouraged from mentioning these side effects, which means that yes, it's going to be, the evidence on this is going to be shaky because they didn't have the opportunity or were discouraged to say these things. So the meta-analysis is going to have a skewed perception on the negative effects because of this already. So I'm just pointing out some specific instances in which this has occurred. I'm not saying generalizing it's going to be something as a whole, but we have to realize that it's not just a 100 perfect, happy solution that occurs. There needs to be more research. And when you look to the comparative analysis and you look to the meta study, you see that there is no comparative benefit over other activities, such as exercise and other activities that could occur in the classroom. So again, to recap my points, first, it violates liberty by forcing an establishment of religion. Either you have a mandatory class and you violate the Establishment Clause, or you don't have a mandatory class and you still violate the Establishment Clause, but you're likely to have less people enrolled in class. And secondly, there's minimal benefit to this analysis as well as harms, which I'll detail in my next two speeches.
Again, I would invite you to cite the Supreme Court case and cite the language in that case, which would suggest that an elective class is which teaches meditation is unconstitutional. There are schools that are currently doing this very thing. They are teaching meditation in their schools. And in fact, in those schools, it actually is a mandatory class. And things in the United States are legal until they are deemed illegal. So in this case, if you're saying that, well, in the future, the Supreme Court may strike this down as something illegal, that doesn't mean that right now it's illegal. It means that at some point, perhaps in the future, the Supreme Court may rule on this and may rule that meditation is indeed violative of the Establishment Clause. But that certainly hasn't happened yet. Moreover, I think that one of the key disconnects we have in this case is that you are trying to suggest that this debate must be about a compulsory, every single person in the school type of course, and that's simply not suggested by the resolution language. And you're trying to say that, well, the resolution language must be informed by some sort of context of things in the news, and I don't know where you get that from. I'm using the words on the page. If the words in the resolution were that meditation should be mandated in all schools in the United States, I think you'd have a much stronger argument. But at this point, what we have is that meditation should be taught in schools, and that is certainly a fair representation to say they should be offered as an elective. So now, I guess your other point is that, well, if it's an elective, then there's no guarantee that people will join it. And of course, I suppose that's correct, but there's certainly no guarantee that they won't join it. So I guess we're kind of at an impasse there. I don't know how to get around that. Certainly, there is a pervasive interest in it. In fact, the United States Marine Corps is now engaging in mindfulness practice. And to address your supposition that it is inherently religious and to equate it with prayer, Jeff Bearer, the executive deputy of the Marine Corps Training and Education Command in Quantico, Virginia, said some people might say these are Eastern-based religious practices, but this goes way beyond that. This is not tied to any religious practice. This is about mental preparation to better handle stress. in a world where stress is mounting, and particularly in a world where school subjects are less and less relevant because of Google and because of the different knowledge bases that we have at our fingertips, why are we learning to spell when we have autocorrect? Why are we learning to add when we have calculators? Why aren't we learning things to de-stress, to be able to handle pressure better, to be able to engage in deep thought, which meditation also helps, to be able to engage in these kind of deep, more meaningful mental exercises, particularly when knowledge is really cheap at the moment?
Okay, so he brings up this by saying that it's not now illegal. And yes, I would say that right now it's not illegal, but I've given reasons as to why it is inherently a religious practice. And if this were to be instituted in more and more schools, it would be an issue with the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would rule against it. So the court case Engel versus Vitale shows why school-sanctioned prayer is not allowed in schools. And by teaching this class as mandatory or not mandatory, as an elective, during the school day, as I brought up, he's never responded to the studies, to the founders of the mindfulness movement or this meditation that's currently popularized in the schools. These people are using it and have the religious motivation to have this mindfulness meditation in order for religious purposes, to have people want to enroll in more Buddhist classes, or because it's rooted in Buddhist traditions. So he brings up this argument from Jeff Baer, who says that it's merely mental preparation. And I would agree that there are different forms of mental preparation. It doesn't necessarily have to be meditation that allows you to be able to de-stress. For example, this can be done by exercise as well. But what I'm saying is that meditation should not be taught in schools because there's other non-religious activities that you can do and teach that still have the same kinds of benefits, if there are any benefits. As I was saying, that the meta-study showed that when you compare the two, there is no really conclusive benefit. So let's move on to again, looking at the two main points in my argument. First, in how it violates liberty by the Establishment Clause. Again, we have to look at the impacts of having it ruled unconstitutional, because as I've given reason that it would be ruled unconstitutional because it is establishing a religion in a public school, it would be ruled over, which means that there would be no possible benefit for him to gain over the long term if there was any benefit. Moving on to the second main argument, which is that there is a minimal benefit or even a harm to it. He doesn't really respond to any of the examples or the analysis talking about acting against injustice, which I brought up in the second speech, which says that part of mindfulness meditation or meditation in general is to accept your circumstances or to focus on them. And what this leads them, children, to do is to accept their terrible circumstances and not want to fight back against it, or to do things which will promote justice in times where there is injustice being done. So this is a way of indoctrinating our children very harmfully that he hasn't responded to. That's a way of harming our society as a whole, because people want to step out of injustice. If this is how we continually indoctrinate our kids, this isn't the kind of country that we want to live in. And as well as the mental harms and psychological harms that do occur, we have to realize that there are some very negative side effects that children who may enter these classes have no idea that they're going to encounter. So just to sum up, in my next speech, I'm going to wrap up the entirety of the case and look at three critical questions to see whether or not we should affirm or negate.
So first, to deal with the legal argument, I just did a little bit of armchair research here. And in 2013, a case called Sedlock v. Baird, Judge John S. Meyer, a federal judge, decides in favor of the Encinitas School District's yoga program, stating that the yoga course has a secular purpose, neither advances nor inhibits religion, and does not represent excessive government entanglement with religion. And so, again, you're kind of presupposing that the Supreme Court is going to strike this down, which is a dubious claim. First of all, because as a Supreme Court watcher myself, I can tell you that trying to predict what the Supreme Court is going to do with any particular case is quite difficult. And secondly, because there is actual precedent dealing with yoga, which is very, I guess, closely related. Certainly, I would think more religiously sounding than just a practice of mindfulness meditation. Now, you speak again of this this harm that would befall a minority of students, this 7% of students, and you still haven't answered. I mean, what about the students that have negative implications stemming from their participation in athletics and gym class? Do we stop gym class? Can you answer that argument? I think that what you would end up saying is, well, yeah, some people have a bad time in gym class, but because of the overall benefits, we still have to go through with it. Second of all, as an elective class, you certainly have the ability to opt out of this class, drop this class, or not enroll in it at all. So the idea that somehow, well, these students who don't know that they're going to be negatively impacted are going to join, and then they're going to be negatively impacted before they even know that they were going to be negatively impacted. I mean, it's a bootstrapping, dubious argument, and I think that the judges should reject it. Now, you state that other things can achieve the same benefits, but I don't see why we would have to choose between one and the other. If this provides a benefit, which it seems that you are now conceding, you're saying that, well, other things can give the same benefit. So there must be some benefit to give if these other things are giving benefit. So if other things can give the benefit, then why not use this as well? Why not use it in conjunction with the others? Now, there is this kind of odd question about accepting or focus on your circumstance and not trying to fight back against injustices. I don't understand how that's supposed to operate. One person that practices meditation is the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama has been standing, strongly against China, who has been attempting to subjugate it for decades, and has stood strong against that injustice, and has done so while practicing a form of meditation. Now, that in that case, it's Buddhism, but certainly it doesn't prohibit him from standing strong against an injustice and trying to change that circumstance.
Okay, so the first main reason that you're going to be voting con is looking at my second objection, where we look at the 2014 meta-analysis study, which shows that yes, although there may be small benefits in regards to this type of meditation, there's no evidence of a comparative benefit to any other activity, which means that he's going to cite there's some sort of benefit, but there really is very little benefit when you actually compare it to anything else. And if he says then that there are the negative consequences are very similar to a gym class when you have negative consequences, I'm going to argue that there's more than just that. When people are discouraged from saying that they're having negative consequences from meditation, there's a reason for that. And there's a religious push that's being made. He brings up the fact that yoga classes are available in public schools because there's a secular purpose. However, when you look at the leaders of these movements and how they're trying to teach them in schools, you see from them directly that they do not have a secular purpose. When you look to Goodman, she says the intent of secularizing the terms is so that there can be stealth Buddhism in the schools to transform students whether they like it or not. When you look at the TED Talk analysis, which shows how mindfulness is integral to a Buddhist tradition, you're seeing that it's inherently more religious than even the secularized exercise version of yoga that he's trying to announce. So he says, again, he's probably going to bring up the Harvard analysis about how there's a rebuilding of gray matter. However, again, this is possible. However, again, I'm arguing that there's many other things that you do in school that don't have to do this that aren't inherently religious. So the next way you can vote is by looking to the Establishment Clause argument. He says that it's not going to be violating the Constitution or that it's not religious. However, I've given you comprehensive reasons as to why it is inherently religious and how, yes, it would be struck down eventually. Again, I'm not citing a 100% argument, but I'm giving logical reasons as to why this would be the case. And again, when you have to look at the harms of meditation, how you have 7% having adverse effects, psychosis, depression, that is much more than anything you can get in, say, a gym class, and how 63% have experienced negative mental effects, how children are told to not respond to this. Yes, he brought up the Dalai Lama, but children are different. And when they're taught from such a young age to accept injustice rather than fight against it, that's not something we should stand for.
Okay, so first of all, I think that it's important in thinking about this resolution to understand the language of the resolution. I think that my colleague here has basically admitted that the resolution allows for a non-comprehensive, non-compulsory version of an elective class because of the language of the resolution. So with the elective class, certainly I think that avoids the Establishment Clause problem we've been talking about. Otherwise, assuming that you did have a problem with the Establishment Clause, you look at the 2013 case in Sedlock v. Baird, where it states that a yoga class has a secular purpose, neither advances nor inhibits religion, and does not represent excessive government entanglement with religion. So if that federal judge is saying that, I don't know why this person is so sure that the Supreme Court's going to strike it down. This is a learned judge who does this for a living, and in all fairness, certainly we don't have that here before us. As well, he states that you know, the 7% adverse effects are much worse that can happen in gym class. My wife's a gym teacher, and I can tell you broken legs, broken arms, lots of very traumatic things can happen during a gym class, yet we do it. Why do we do it? We do it because on the whole, it is beneficial. And that is the reason why meditation should be taught in schools in an elective format, because of the benefits that can